Okay, so aside from all of these cute anecdotes about people living in false worlds and not knowing what they know and having their status as a knower undermined and all of those things, right? And dealing with false realities when they think that they're real realities and dealing with false versions of characters. What is the philosophical upshot of that? What are we supposed to take out of it? I think we get two big epistemological ideas out of all of this. The first one is this. The show is telling us that our ability to know things accurately, to grab hold of reality, is skewed consistently by wishful thinking. We feel like we're seeing reality, but often we see what we want to see or what we need to see. And it's not at all clear how to get outside of ourselves and our own desires and our own history enough to check if that's going on. It's very hard to tell when we are perceiving and knowing accurately and when we are having our perceptions and our knowledge distorted by this kind of wishful thinking. So Mr. Peanut Butter feels like he's seeing what would make Diane happy. He's not trying to hurt her. He's trying to be nice to her when he throws her the surprise party. But it's wishful thinking. It's what he wants her to want. When Bojack hits the deer in the car, he very directly engages in wishful thinking. He insists that the deer is fine, that it left and now it's fine and it isn't hurt at all, because he wants that to be the case. And then my favorite ironic moment of this in the whole season is when Princess Caroline tells us this directly, right? She says to Vincent Adult Man, I think that wanting to believe something isn't the same as it's being real. So she gives us that epistemological insight that I'm saying is one of the big upshots. But what's so ironic about it is she says it even at the same moment as she's still doing the very thing she's critiquing, right? She still hasn't figured out that Vincent isn't a real person, that he's three kids stacked on top of each other, despite all of the evidence that she keeps seeing over and over again that he's not real. She still doesn't see it. So she's still engaging in that wishful thinking because she wants an adult who loves her and who has made connection with her. Even as she explains the trap of wishful thinking to him, she's still engaging in it. The second big epistemological idea to come out of this season is a more difficult one, and this is one that is getting a lot of discussion in contemporary philosophy, and that's the notion of epistemic injustice. This is what your reading that I've given you for this module by Miranda Fricker is about. Right? The idea of epistemic injustice is this. I pointed out that we need to figure out how much we can trust one another as knowers and when we can take one another's word for things. The problem is that how much we trust other people is not just determined by our undistorted evidence about how reliable they are. Rather, we see people through sets of stereotypes and narratives that tell us what kind of person they are. And our understanding of what kind of person they are can make us give them more credibility than they deserve or less credibility than they deserve. Right? We can take somebody as not an authoritative knower or not an authoritative expert because of the kind of person that they are, rather than because of their actual reliability or the actual undistorted evidence we have for how trustworthy they are. And that is what epistemic injustice is. There's a lot of evidence that women and people of color systematically experience this kind of epistemic injustice. That is to say that their word and their trustworthiness is systematically and regularly discounted in comparison to their actual credentials and training and knowledge and trustworthiness. Fricker gives some examples of that, and they're easy to find. I'll loop back to some later. But here are some other examples of that kind of epistemic injustice. Disabled people typically say that they are much more comfortable with who they are and happy living as a disabled people than able-bodied people predict that they would be. And systematically, we treat disabled people as unable to authoritatively report their own experience. That is, we just don't believe them about how happy they are. We think that they must be just, making the best of it, or fooling themselves into thinking their situation is okay, or they don't understand the realities of how hard their situation is. Normally, we take people as the best authorities on their own experience, but in the case of disabled people, on the topic of their life satisfaction, we systematically undervalue their ability to give us authoritative knowledge about how they experience the world. And that's a case of epistemic injustice. One more example. Fat people typically are not believed when they talk about what they ate or how much they exercise. We act as though they just don't understand their own eating and exercise. Either they're lying or they're fooling themselves. But there is in fact no evidence whatsoever that fat people are any better or worse than anybody else at accurately knowing and reporting how much they eat and how much they exercise. But because of stereotypes we have about how fat people eat and how self-aware they are, which are highly damaging stereotypes, we treat people who are fat with systematic epistemic injustice on this topic. And I think that we see all kinds of examples in this season of epistemic injustice. This, I would argue, is why Diane gets so mad at Mr. Peanut Butter about the Tony Curtis issue. Right? It's not just because he isn't believing her. It's because she feels like her word is being systematically undervalued and discounted in a way that fits in with how women, and women of color in particular, which technically Diane is, although kind of everybody on the show is some color or other, so the notion doesn't apply as well. But in any case, she's definitely presents as a woman, and women typically have to do more work to be taken as authoritative on everyday matters, and it's infuriating. We see this at the party with Mr. Peanut Butter, and then it's going to come back around in much more serious form when she is disbelieved and her word is systematically discounted when she reports that everyone knows that Hank the hippopotamus is in fact a terrible sexual assaulter and sexual harasser. We'll come back to that, right? But that's where the epistemic injustice that we see a little mini version of at the party becomes a really major issue for her later on. So why is it so harmful to not be taken as authoritative? Why is it so harmful to suffer epistemic injustice and not be believed? Well, it's frustrating, right? It's frustrating to be saying something and have people not take you seriously, but it can also deeply undermine your self-confidence, and it can deeply undermine your ability to be integrated in normal ways into social relationships. At its worst, it can turn into what we call gaslighting, where your sense of what's real slowly gets corroded and you lose your faith in yourself as a knower because no one around you is giving you the support you need to take yourself seriously as a knower, and they're all undermining your sense of reality. Right? Bojack feels a little bit like he's being gaslit when it comes to Vincent Adult Man. He keeps pointing out to everybody completely reasonable facts that show that Vincent Adult Man is actually three children stacked on top of one another, and everybody around him acts like Vincent is a regular person, and he feels like it's disorienting and crazy making, right? Like he can't understand how other people are not taking him as just straightforwardly saying an authoritative fact on this matter. So he feels like people are trying to gaslight him, but they don't succeed in gaslighting him because he doesn't lose his grip on reality in that one. He knows all the way through exactly what Vincent is. But at other times, the gaslighting is a little bit more powerful, right? So when he's out on stage with Mr. Peanut Butter and everybody's laughing at him for not knowing things he can't possibly have known, he starts to feel more disorientation, more sense of a corrosion of his reality and his epistemic status. Although it's funny because at the very end there of that episode, he actually lies about what he does know, right? He hides knowing Daniel Radcliffe's name just in order to annoy Daniel Radcliffe, who he's angry with. So at the last moment, he sort of plays around with his ability to tell the truth in an unexpected way. But the real point here is that when you are systematically not given uptake by others as a knower when you should be, at a minimum, it can make you feel like you can't participate in normal ways in social exchanges and in conversations and so on. More severely, it can undermine your own confidence in what you do or don't know. And at its most severe, it can make you lose your grip on reality altogether, and that becomes a risk later on in the series in various ways. Okay, I'm going to pause one more time, and then we'll move on to part 3.